too loud.
Come here.
Hello there, the angel from my nightmares, a shadow in the background of the moor, the unsuspecting victim of darkness in the valley. We can live like Jack and Sally if we want, you can always find me. Yeah, Halloween on Christmas, and in the night we'll wish this never ends, we'll wish this never ends.
Indecision to call you and hear your voice of treason when you come home and stop this pain tonight. Stop this pain tonight. It's your time on you.
Mistakes, too long, too late. Who was I to make you wait? Just one chance, just one breath, just in case there's just one left. 'Cause you know.
Look, Uncle Steve again. Look, Uncle Steve again. Look, Uncle Steve again. Look, Uncle Steve again. Make them Papa. Uncle Steve again. And Uncle Steve again. Uncle Steve again. Uncle Steve again.
Ever leave this world alive, well, thank you for the things you did in my life. If I ever leave this world alive, I'll come back down and sit beside your feet tonight. Wherever I am, you'll always be just call my name just before you go insane. If I ever leave this world, I may never leave this world, but if I ever leave this world alive, she says I'm okay.
Yeah.
I'm alright, though you have gone.
better way to start off an evening like this than to celebrate Steve Holifield's life. What an inspiration to all of us, and it's certainly one of these times where it's certainly in many ways sad to be here, but in other ways it's just an opportunity for us to be encouraged with one another's presence and to be able to say that we knew Steve Holifield and we were touched by him in many ways. Before he was no longer able to work with us, and I have found that he was very passionate about helping students. That was his goal, was to meet the needs of students and to give everything he had for them. And we found it fitting that Christine called and asked, hey, would you mind if we had the service at the school? And it was without giving it a second thought. Yes, we would love, we'd be honored to go.
Around with your pictures. He's a great guy. And that little silver dot was for you. You can still talk to us.
Steve was and continues to be such an important part of our lives. He was very influential, always had a positive way to approach any situation, whether it be with family or as a teacher with the students. There wasn't anything that Steve thought he couldn't do. We have so many memories of all the fun stuff we have done together. Get-togethers up in Big Bear in snow, going on the boat, which I never would have done without Steve's encouragement, the water. Our huge Christmases, beach camping, jeeping.
Hi everybody. Thanks for coming out here tonight. Let's see if I can do this. The family wanted to share something fun, something interesting about Steve that some of you may or may not know. Unfortunately, my father could not be here tonight, so he did want me to read to you something he sent to me. He says, I have a lot of memories about Steve. Some of the most memorable things about Steve that I remember: wrestling with him in the front yard, overnight camping in the backyard and sleeping in a cardboard tent. I don't remember a cardboard tent, but they made one. Watching Steve score his final goal in his team match. Fun we had with Indian guides and the excitement he showed in catching the largest trout at Jackson Lake. The joy Steve had in Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts and other campouts we went to. The pride he had when he became an Eagle Scout. The protection he displayed when his sister's candy was stolen on Halloween. The pride he had driving my 1960s MGA Sportster as a teenager. The many bicycle rides we did to and from the beach and to Sun City to see his grandma and grandpa. The enjoyment of him singing as a young boy at the First Baptist Church in Pomona, giddy up, I am a cowboy. Riding his mini bike in the desert with Steve and his brother. Riding mini bikes in the desert with Stephen was the only one to find a barbed wire fence to run into. But after taking a visit to the Victorville Hospital and getting 6 or 7 stitches, we returned to ride once again. I'm very proud of the man Steve became, and the words cannot describe how much I will miss him. That is his father.
Hi, I'm Steve's mom. Steve's childhood was filled with many activities. School was his first priority. He was a very, very good student and applied himself to all of his studies, and they came first. But he loved soccer and he loved scouts. He became an Eagle Scout. He also played music with Sean and Brian here tonight. They had a little band going in a garage. and we had a good time doing that. He had many friends he entertained with his musical instrument. He played at some school dances. Steve dearly loved his dog, Burley. Each morning was good morning to Burley. On the patio with hugs and treats before school. Steve loved to come home to smell food cooking. He loved my meatloaf and always wanted homemade cookies. Steve loved the foot rub and he loved the back scratch. He rode a unicycle with his friends who are here tonight and one 10 foot tall with a huge wheel. He also worked at his father's bike shop. Because of no mischief and got paid. It never seemed to be enough for his expenses, but as a kid. He was always enthusiastic, excited about adventures. A family camping trip or a vacation to Missouri in our bubble top van made size light up. I remember one day, and without the kids knowing, we packed a bubble top van and surprised the kids with a vacation to see Uncle Donnie, a musician in Tucson, Arizona. Also remember a trip back from Missouri. Steve pulled from his pocket a baby turtle. Which had apparently been in his pocket since we left Missouri. Mom and Dad decided it was not going to make it to California, so we stopped and had Steve let it off at a park in Oklahoma. He was only 6 years old at this time. We had a paver route, and I remember one day when it was windy, Steve begged me to take him in the car or the station wagon so that he didn't have to ride his bike. He forgot to put rubber bands around the papers. It's so funny. Papers were flying all over the street, even though it was already delivered. We had a good laugh, but I told him we need to clean up this mess, so we did. Steve also had chores around the house, mainly mowing and keeping his room clean. As Steve grew up, he was willing to help me around the house and always would say, Mom, just make a list. I always treasured my time with Steve, and I'm going to miss him dearly. I love the fact that his family, Christine, Brianne, and Brandon were just number one. He loved his family so much, and always had a smile on his face. So Steve, I love you, and I turn you back to Jesus.
As Steve's oldest brother, I have a lot of good memories of him doing things together. We were only 1 year apart in age. And most of my fondest memories of Steve are associated with holidays. And as a kid, Steve's favorite holiday was Halloween. I mean, he really loved that holiday. I mean, what kid wouldn't? You get to dress up however you want to be for a day. And in the early 1970s, in our neighborhood, there was a lot of kids. And I remember one Halloween in particular. My mom woke both my brother and I up pretty early in the morning, definitely before the sun came up. And she wanted to try out a new makeup technique on Halloween on us. And she read about it in the Ladies' Home Journal. And were we in for a treat? My brother volunteered to go first. He was always the daring one. And about 2.5 hours later, with very little moaning and groaning, my mom transported my brother into a real-life teenage werewolf. This wasn't any kind of werewolf costume. This was all done with makeup and a really nice varsity jacket. My brother had strips of sheep's or lamb's wool attached from the front of his face all the way back the back of his hairline. And all that was attached using nothing more than corn syrup. The same treatment was given to his arms and his hands. His fingernails were blackened with a marker pen. His eyes were blackened with, as I remember, shoe polish. And when it came to the finishing touches, it was the fangs. I won't go into detail how those were made, but they were organic. So Steve went to school that day just beaming with pride, his outfit that he had. Everybody loved it until the sun came out. It was hot that day, really hot. And you guessed it, the corn syrup started melting on him. And with sugar comes insects and bugs and itching. And by the time he got to third period, his hair was a nesting ground for every living flying creature he could imagine. But you know, he didn't complain. My brother wasn't a complainer. When he got home, he showered. He gorged himself on pizza, which is our family tradition. Every Halloween we have pizza. And he put on his old Jimmy Carter rubber mask he had worn the year before. Remember, this is the mid-'70s. And he went trick-or-treating. And like every Halloween night, he came back with more candy than any other family members. It's probably the most memorable thing I remember about my brother. The daring person he was. Of course, he didn't complain very much. And the go-getter, he loved to have a good time.
So I'm the little sister. Pamela Dugdale once said, siblings are the people we practice on, the people who teach us about fairness and cooperation and kindness and caring, quite often the hard way. Growing up with my brother Steve was a comfort to me. On many occasions, I had troubles staying asleep through the night. I guess you could say I had kind of a fear of the dark. Anyway, I knew if I could somehow get the courage to run into his room, I would be okay. So I remember laying in bed and counting to 3 over and over again until I had enough courage to run across the hall and into his bedroom. Then I would curl up to him and I would be right between him and the wall where his bed was pushed up against. Of course, me being the youngest one in the family, I always asked him for permission to fall asleep next to him. He always said I could, but under only one condition could I do this. I had to scratch his back until he fell back asleep. So I began scratching his back until I thought he was sleeping. Then before I knew it, the bed would wiggle, indicating he was far from that. Well, I didn't want that to ever be the deal breaker if I didn't start scratching again. So I kept scratching and again scratching. Oftentimes, this exchange between both of us would go on throughout the night, and it lasted for many, many years. Steve enjoyed taking road trips to Colorado with his wife, Christine, Brianna, and Brandon. He decided it was time to make his last trip out to visit us in Colorado. Joining him this time was his son Brandon, his mom, and his dad. Together, we experienced a trip of a lifetime with him. As we shared that week together in Beaver Creek, Colorado, we had long visits and shared life-changing experiences together. On our way back to California, we stopped at a hotel that was equipped to handle his special needs. I was able to revisit that childhood memory just one more time, so I curled up next to him, scratching his forearm, except this time, I comforted him until I fell asleep.
Still working? It's not working. Damn. It's all right. Well, I'm Steve's sister's crazy husband. And very proud to be of this family and of this family and to know everyone. And Steve reminded me of the guy who went into the restaurant one day, and he sat down and he was talking into his hand. And he, the waiter came up as this gentleman was talking into his hand and says, "Would you like a drink?" And the guy talking to his hand totally ignored him. And he continued talking into his hand. The waiter was just sitting there, and he finally puts his hand down and he goes, "Sir, who are you talking to?" He says, "Oh, I have a cell phone implanted into my hand." And he says, "Well, how'd you get that?" And he said, "Well, this is new technology, absolutely new technology." So he says, "I have to go to the restroom." So he goes, the guy with the implanted cell phone says he has to go to the restroom. The waiter, he goes back to his staff. He says, "You're not going to believe this. This guy has got an implanted cell phone. It's unbelievable." He's telling everybody in the restaurant. 5 minutes go by, 10 minutes go by, and there's no sign of this guy with the implanted cell phone. And the staff's starting to question him a little bit. And he goes into the restroom and he sees this guy. He's got his hands up on the wall and he's got his drawers all the way down to his ankles and he's got toilet paper coming from his rear. And he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm receiving a fax." That is Steve Holifield. He is always on the cutting edge of technology. He was always pursuing the program to put on his computer, the best way to do something. Now, it didn't always work, but he was always pursuing excellence. And to see the place that he taught, and you saw the wheelchair that he had, and you saw that dot on his forehead. That's how he communicated with everybody, because he was always pursuing excellence. It's amazing to me as he digressed, and he was dealt these set of cards with ALS, and that he made the best of it, the absolute best of it. His attitude was unbelievable. And towards the end of his life, he did something that I don't think many people could do. And this is because he, in his pursuit of excellence, he was able to combine his heart and his mind, his soul and his mind together as one. Because he was not able to talk to you. All he could do is just look in your eyes. And you could see what he was thinking and what he felt at the same time. And that is Stephen Lee Holifield at his best, even when his body was at his worst. And that's what I have to say. Thank you. I'm sorry, I have one more. I have 3 kids, and we're from Colorado. And my daughter, Whitney, wrote a letter to Steve. And she wanted us to share this with you. And it says, "Thank you, Uncle Steve, for teaching me resilience. Thank you for bringing out the fight in your efforts to stay alive. You've been an influence in my life. It's made me feel special when you called me Witters growing up. Thank you for staying up with me over the phone explaining how to solve those dang math problems that confused me so much. I will never forget swimming and being blasted from your broad shoulders like a rocket You launched me higher than anyone else could. I truly thank you, Uncle Steve. You will always be remembered as an amazing person who did everything in his power to hold on what means most to you.
Steve was a hero. He rarely complained, even when he could only move his eyebrows. He loved to smile. He adored his wife and family. He was nuts about math. Weird, I know. He valued and loved life and lived it to the fullest. But most importantly, he never gave up hope, even in death. We know he is at peace in heaven, relieved of his long suffering, and know because our shared faith in God, we will see Steve again.
Amen.
In 2005, the first symptoms of ALS began to appear when his right hand began to curl, and we all tried to figure out what was happening. There were 2 years of constant tests and pains and turmoil. But it didn't stop him. He camped, he rode his motorcycle, hung out with the kids, went to the beach, did everything that Steve always did. And in 2007, he was diagnosed with ALS. By this point, he could barely walk. There were many tries at diets, vitamins, supplements, whatever it was, organic, everything, to continue doing what it was he loved with his family and here at school. Whenever you talked to Steve, he was always optimistic, and he always knew that he was getting better. He was just right there. He was feeling better. Things were going to get better. In 2008, he had issues with breathing. He taught as long as he could until he was bedridden, but was always determined. Never stopped smiling. Never stopped loving. It was a very difficult last 3 years, but Steve never gave up. He was an inspiration to everyone. And on March 4th, it was his time to be with God. We have some t-shirts up on the walls here, and Holipalooza has become a much beloved event here at the AAE. He was never defined by ALS. His actions serve as a testimony to all of us that the circumstances in our lives do not define us. That what we do defines us, that our character defines us. And that's the lesson that I am convinced Steve taught us, not in words, but in actions. You inspired me in more ways than you could know. You were always optimistic. You kept teaching and doing what you loved no matter what because you cared more about us than yourself. And you pursued everything with a thankful heart. You were one of the best, kindest, and unique teachers I've ever had. I remember going into your class early, not only what was in the math book, but a better way to approach life. Thank you, God, for blessing me with this teacher and role model. And finally, words are not enough to thank you, Mr. Holifield, for all you have done for so many of us. Thanks for teaching my child and her friends. Thank you for your kind and gentle ways. Thank you for all your joy in the face of your illness. I wish I had given back a fraction of what I received from you. I find solace in picturing you finally home with Jesus. I have no doubt that you have heard the words. Well done, good and faithful.
So we took 12 kids and went to England and Ireland and Wales and just had a very, very memorable time. And it was a struggle for him. And before we left, he goes, you know, I'm going to ask you to cut my food every meal. You know I'm going to have to slow down at times. You know I'm going to have to take it a little bit easy, but I'm going to be there every step of the way because this is what I need to do. I need to go on this trip. And so Christine let him go. And we traveled all over England and Ireland and Wales. He got to see some things that he never imagined that he would see. We rode on the London Eye. We walked from the London Eye to the Tower Bridge, which doesn't look very far on a map, but it's a couple miles. And he was right there. He had a blast with the kids. He did sneak off one time to go have a Guinness in Dublin. And then when we got to Ireland, he climbed the stairs of Blarney Castle and got to the top and hung over the side and kissed the Blarney Stone. And then the culmination of the trip at the end was to go to the cliffs of Connemara on the west side of Ireland and just look out over the ocean going, that's the direction to the United States. And just had a wonderful, wonderful time. So I want to thank Christine and Brianna and Brandon for sharing Steve with us, for sharing him with me. The memories are in my heart forever. So thank you.
A great story about Steve, though, for me, occurred right in this office here. And being the math man that he was in that class, he was so excited because he wanted us to be unionized. And Rick Piercy and Gordon Stoholt were non-union as teachers, but he had everything in order. He had everybody's salaries. He had everything organized exactly the way it should be. And when he walked out of that room, I just went, wow, what a math teacher. Process A all the way to the end, and he had every answer. And I was just in awe of this person and the way he was. And the last thing, Steve, tonight is March Madness. You're the only person I would miss game for. Goodbye, my friend.
Comics with the math students doing he had on the walls and everything. Loved his sense of humor, but the strongest evidence of Steve's impact on young people and on students was the overwhelming enthusiasm that so many students showed when we put on the fundraisers, Holifield. And I love that name that they had come up with, Holifield. It really spoke of Steve and his passion for life. And it had to be a music festival because they saw Steve as not just their math teacher, but a really hip dude who liked a lot of the same music that they did. And after Steve's diagnosis, as we've spoken of, he continued to teach, and not just mathematics anymore, but how to face the hardships of life with dignity and courage. And he kept that gentle sense of humor. He joked about getting the Rolls Royce of wheelchairs and rolling over anybody who dared to get in his path. He spoke honestly with students about his diagnosis and about his optimism and about life's obstacles. And I feel that he demonstrated an awesome amount of love for all of us, for students, colleagues, friends, most of all his family, by teaching us the most important lesson, the example that he set for all of us, and that will live with us for all of our lives.
There is a place that I know where I need more often to go. A place of amazing comfort and prayer, where a smile is never rare, and your love is as free as the air. And I lack for nothing when I can see the love in your eyes and know it's all for me. I fear nothing at all.
Holifield's Math Department colleagues, and who's going to close us in prayer. And then I'd like to invite you to our reception just across in the cafeteria as we close. And thank you so much for coming.
Father God, I just thank you for the time that we have with Steve. Lord, that he's touched so many lives, thousands of students.
his children, his wife, his family, Lord, and colleagues, and all of us, every one of us is better off for having known him, for having spoken to him. Lord, even though the time was too short, 80 years would have been too short. 100 years, Steve, would be too short. Thank you for this opportunity we've had to honor him. Lord, I ask your peace and comfort on all of Steve's loved ones and those of us that miss him, that grieve him. But Lord, let us carry on and act like him and tackle life. Take it on head on, Father. And I thank you for being with us as we go over and continue to remember Steve and as we travel on back to our homes. In Jesus' name, amen.
Up the west, come this way. You probably scared her, so she's scared her.
Good to have you here, Brian.